I have a really weird history with Final Fantasy XIV. Unlike most people, I really liked Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. Every time I played it, I was genuinely really invested in what it was doing, and I really enjoyed my time with it. But after the game kind of relaunched with 2.0, I played it for probably about like 6 to 12 months. And at some point, I just realized the game I loved just wasn't there anymore. And I eventually decided to kind of move on. But as time has gone on, this is a game that has grown a huge fan base that, in some ways has kind of come and gone. There's a very positive and negative feelings about the game. But it was one of those things that just like every time I tried to come back to the game, I really wanted to understand what people loved about modern Final Fantasy XIV at whatever time was modern. And I never could see it for some reason. And even today, I still struggle really hard to see it. So I really wanted to talk to somebody who actually enjoys the game today. Not somebody who 5 years ago, thought it was good and has since kind of fallen off. I want to talk to somebody who is invested in what the title is doing in the modern day, as we're talking at least, right? So I brought on the show Alex Fraioli, which if the name sounds familiar, he was previously on a previous podcast that we did about Sea of Stars, where we kind of talked about the idea of what love letter RPGs were and things like that. He's a big RPG guy, he's a big Dragon Quest guy, and I believe also a big Final Fantasy guy. I guess I haven't really ever clarified that with him, but he at least likes Final Fantasy XIV a lot. And I really want to kind of pick his brain on, what he loves about the game and really ask some questions. I will say one thing I noticed in editing this, I kind of assumed this might have happened, is that both me and Alex have played Final Fantasy XI, and Final Fantasy XI in a lot of ways my anchor point for MMORPGs. So just as a heads up, we use that a lot when we're talking about references of like how different games are designed. So hopefully it's good enough to follow, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. When it comes to MMORPGs and things like that, did you have experience with that before Final Fantasy XI, or was 11 your first kind of
No,
foray
11
into that space?
11 was my first MMO RPG.
Yeah.
I had played Phantasy Star Online, but that's hardly massively multiplayer. It's just like it's 3D Diablo basically, which is why I loved it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the FF11 hit me at just the right time because it was my second or third year of college, and I was writing for a website called the Gaming Intelligence Agency from back in the day, which closed down in 2001. But I was keeping in touch with some of the friends who wrote for it, and we all started playing. Some of us started playing FF11 together, and that was kind of a way to keep us in touch in a fun way. And that's how I instantly, fell in with FF11. I was like, oh, this is really fun. I really like this.
So was that like the primary drive for you to play Final Fantasy XI? Because you played Final Fantasy before that, right? So like, what were you expecting out of 11 when you were looking at it, if you can remember?
I didn't know because I'd never played an MMO up to that point. I even wrote, I think I wrote the preview for FF11 for the GIA. Where
wow.
you comb over the official website and you glean as much information as you can. Here's some screenshots. Fans of the series will love it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to expect going in. I think the thing that surprised me most was what a tremendous time sink it all is. Which obviously is by design. It's an MMO. They want to keep you subscribed as many months as possible. So it should take you a million years to do anything. Just by point of contrast, like it took me over a year to beat the main scenario, to actually defeat the Shadow Lord. I went back to FF11 last year out of curiosity. Retail started a new character, beat the Shadow Lord, I want to say within a week. It's so much faster now.
Yeah.
Many things are. But yeah, at the time, in 2003 or 4, whenever it came out, it was such a slog. But also, I was still at the stage in my life where, I'm young, I will live forever. I have all the time in the world to play video games. I don't care how long a game is. And I just ate it up. I loved it.
Yeah. When it comes to like that, because, in Final Fantasy XI, not to get too deep into this, but when you first walk out of town, right, and you get into a fight with an enemy, it's like, I'm going to click attack. and nothing's going to happen. But you're gonna sit there and like I joke about it, and it's something that I probably shouldn't joke about. And I think that when I make eventually, I always talk about this Final Fantasy 11 video forever. When I make this Final Fantasy 11 video, I do think I want to like better analyze what's happening in that first zone. But do you know what the thing was that kept you when the game is literally click attack and watch your character punch the thing?
Um, because I am such a fan of JRPGs in general, the
Mhm.
number one game mechanic, the one that will always get me and keep me glued to a game, is incremental growth. As
Gotcha.
long as I am constantly growing slowly to overcome
Mhm.
some kind of obstacle, I am playing that game.
Yeah, yeah.
And FF11 is, what if that, but it never stopped. And that's why I fell in love with it.
It does stop eventually,
I
but
don't know.
yeah.
It stops
Well,
when you unsub, yeah.
yeah, there you go, yes. Um,
Because sorry, just to, one more
yeah.
thing about that. Yeah, because when I did revisit the game recently, I was struck by, I was confused with what's the goal now? What is the end game now for people? Because the only growth left is like you're grinding out, the new top weapon to get an extra couple of points of accuracy on it. And like that kind of
Mm,
incremental growth is where it starts to wear thin for me. Like, it's like in an offline RPG where you kill the super hard optional bonus boss and you get the best sword in the game. Why do I need this now? I don't need
yeah,
the
yeah.
sword anymore because I already beat the only challenge left. And 11 kind of, to my knowledge, ended up at that point where, well, you want to get the best equipment so you can then help your friends get their best equipment. And then after that, it's like, uh-oh, what do we do now?
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I think and in revisiting Final Fantasy 11 recently, I think I realized I don't really like that much of what people prioritize about like old FF11. So there's this whole concept of like the level 75 era where the game stopped at one level and they just kind of did a lot of horizontal progression. I like level 1 through 50. That is, I think, my golden period of Final Fantasy 11. And a lot of, I think, level 1 through 50 is like earning more capabilities. And one of the things that's interesting is like in game like another other games, I feel like when you play a job, you're always going to get that ability. No matter what, they want you to have whatever core abilities you need. Where Final Fantasy 11, it's like, oh, you want a ranged attack on a warrior? Did you buy a crossbow? Once you buy a crossbow, that's when you can use a ranged attack. Otherwise, you never use your ranged attack. So,
Yeah.
so that kind of thing. So it's a little interesting. I think we're probably gonna get into this when we talk about the end game of 14 a little bit, because I think there's a lot of things that I have questions about in
Oh, yeah.
that regard. So, anyways, putting a cap on the 11 talk, mostly just want to kind of figure out like how you got into MMOs, how you got into 11,
Yeah.
like what was important to you,
Yeah,
kind of
it was
thing.
real quick though, talking about, I did dip into FF11 Horizon briefly, and it kind of reminded me how much I really did not like the 75 era because it
Mhm.
was so slow. I do appreciate all the QOL stuff that they've added to the game over the years. It is pretty playable now in a modern sense. It still takes a while to get anywhere or do anything, but a lot of other stuff has been streamlined, which is nice.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like more than anything, it is still such a humongous time sink that I can only see FF. Like if you have the time to play FF11, my first thought is like it's a sign of affluence. It's like, you must be doing real well that you can put aside, 1 to 8 hours a day to do a quest in FF11. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool that you're in a situation where your life will allow you to do that. Because I tried to do it. I tried to get back into FF11 recently, and I had no time to do it. I couldn't do anything. I'm like, oh, I got work. Oh, I got to go out. I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
don't understand how it's one of the reasons that I've turned away from open world games in general. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming YouTube video about how FF14 isn't really open world, but FF11 kind of is.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah, I think most Final Fantasy 11 you have to like plan. Well, there's a certain point early on where it's not as big of a deal, but like 3 to 4 hours for any content in 11 is what you just set aside basically.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was in a Dynamis Link shell towards the end of my tenure with 11, and like they were in the UK, I was in Japan. I'm waking up at 4 a.m. and we're scheduled because I have to do it before work, and we're only scheduled for 2 hours. I don't think we ever had a raid that was more than an hour, because the first hour is just, oh, we're waiting for Kevin to log on. He's the tank. Oh, now Susie has to bring her cat back from the vet. Oh, this guy's got to bring his kids to school. Hang on, I'm going to be 5 minutes. I'm going to let the dog out. All right, we're ready. No, James went outside for a cigarette. It's that. They just keep daisy chaining on each other until you're an hour behind schedule. And then what's the point?
My favorite change with Horizon 11 is that people vape instead of smoke now, so
Yeah.
I go vape a little
Um,
bit.
yeah, I have been using that to know who the old heads are in my FF14 group, is that they step outside for a cigarette instead of a vape.
So Final Fantasy XIV obviously has this really long history. It launched in like a different state than what it's at today, and it's been 10 years since it relaunched. So even the original game's changed a ton. What was your like initial relationship with Final Fantasy XIV? Were you interested in that original like 1.0 kind of era, or was that something you just kind of stayed away from?
I was not interested in 1.0,
Mhm.
but I did pick it up for the relaunch when it came out on. No, I wasn't even there for 2.0. I think I started playing with Heaven's Ward when Heaven's Ward came out on PS3.
Hmm.
Um, and I was looking for really FF11 2.0 is what I wanted. And what I got instead, I hated. I did not like FF14 when I first played it. I played the free month, and then I didn't touch it for years.
Can I see one
Um,
question before you get too deep into that? Do you know why you weren't interested in 1.0?
um, I think because I had had my fill at the time of online games for a while, and I was like, I think we can skip this one.
Yeah.
Because that was also 2010,
Yeah.
and I think I had also started getting busy with other side projects and stuff. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to give it the time. But then by the time the Heaven's Ward release came around on the PS3 was when I was saving money to open the bar. I was only working part-time. I was living in a shoe. I had nothing to do. So I picked up Heaven's Ward, played my free month, and was like, I don't like this. I don't like how sort of Twitch reflex-based the combat is. It feels, I mean, it's not really. I was just trying to rationalize, not having to play it.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't like the combat at all. It was just, hitting a rotation, waiting for your abilities to refresh, and then mashing them again. And that's true for the lower levels. I didn't understand that it gets more complex after that. But yeah, played that month. Didn't come back to it until Stormblood dropped. And a couple of friends back in America said, "Hey, Dingus, we will buy you the expansion and we will pay your sub for 2 months if you play with us." And I'm like, well, you're twisting my arm. So I did. And now, long story short, they quit and I'm still playing, is where we are.
So what was the key difference between your experience with Heaven's Word versus Stormblood? Because I imagine you were still having to level up and all that stuff. Like, so you
Yes.
initially were coming on and you were still doing all the typical rotation stuff, or did things change by that point? I don't know.
No, the combat was largely unchanged. It was just, I think what hooked me in is I'm a humongous weeb. I've been in Japan for the past 18 years, and Stormblood introduced Fantasy Asia as an environment, and it
Mhm.
also introduced the Samurai job class, which was my main job class in FF11. I just want to play any class with a big knife that can hit stuff real hard. And so they unveiled Samurai for FF14. I'm like, oh man, this looks really cool. I like this job. And I'm like, all right, these knuckleheads are paying my sub for 2 months. I'm going to tool around with Samurai, and if I like it, I'll keep playing the game. And it turns out I really like it.
And I think
Uh,
by that point they had started trying to get away from that like early game stuff where it's like we're going to start you at level 40, right? Is that accurate, or is that later?
that's well, no, I mean, you still start at level 1, but they have introduced the option of buying skips. I think you
Oh,
can
okay.
buy skips up to 50, or no, you can buy job skips for specific
Gotcha.
jobs if you're making an alt and you don't want to have to go through all that rigmarole again.
Okay, I
Yeah.
misunderstood that because I think at one point I had thought that they were like, "Hey, we understand the early game's bad for jobs, so we just skip you past it." But
Yeah,
it
it
is a
is.
paid thing. Yeah.
Yeah, 2.0 is still not great. They have skimmed a lot of the meandering quests. I think Yoshi P said they cut 13% of the quests because it was just nothing. It was just busy work, and they're like, "This is not it's already bloated. Let's get rid of these."
I think that's like smart to do that though, because like even when playing Final Fantasy 11, there's a lot of weird things. It's like, oh, you need to wait till next week till you can do the next quest, and
Yeah.
it's like pretty clear. We're just look. we need you to just keep paying your subscription
Yeah,
while we work on the next thing.
it's
So
really brash when you think about it. I want my
yeah.
new gloves. No, you gotta wait till Japanese midnight. What? Why? All right, I guess.
He's an armor smith. He needs to take the time to do it. It's like there's a lot of weird stuff like that in 11, but like some
Yeah.
ways it's kind of silly because it gives you a lore reason why you can't pick up your gloves, but then somebody else in a different quest just is like, "Oh, I made these for you after you gave it to me immediately." so, um, so I guess you went through kind of a handful of expansions there, but I guess one thing I'm kind of curious about is like, do you view the like overall development of Final Fantasy 14 in phases, right? Because this is an ongoing game for 10 years that's constantly changing. And do you think it is like a game that has had a variety of priorities throughout, or has it felt like really consistent in what their core goals are when they're making content?
I think that focus tends to shift
Mhm.
from expansion to expansion. They started emphasizing more of the end game fights. I think around Stormblood is when they started to get real serious about it. There was a big housing crisis, not a real one, but a fake one for people who want a fantasy house. Real estate in FF14 is a commodity and it's infuriating trying to get a house, and they've kind of done things to address this, but not really.
I have
As a
had
result,
friends that said they subscribe specifically just to keep their house, which I feel like
yeah,
I don't. I wonder how intentional that is. Of just like if we make it so their house gets destroyed if they don't log in, does does that mean they'll keep paying? Like, how is just Square Enix thinking about that, I guess?
yeah, I that seems very much tied to the business model.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons, like, there's three sizes of house. There's small, medium, and large, and I always
Mhm.
wanted at least a medium. I got a small at one point, and then I moved servers, so I had to lose it. And I've never gotten a medium or a large, and I've just given up hope because what's the point anymore?
Yeah.
Like, I have to put in all this legwork to go around looking for a vacant lot, putting my name in for the lottery, paying millions of yen as a deposit. It's like buying a real place. Like, my wife and I bought an apartment a couple of years ago, and it's a lot like that situation. I don't want to go through that again, or even in pretend. It sucked. And this also just reminds me, oh yeah, this I don't care. Okay, I get to decorate a house like it's Animal Crossing. I don't need to do that. I'm fine. I've already played Animal Crossing once. I don't need to do this again. Um, but yeah, the housing was just one angle of many that they've been covering over the years. The main story itself has been going places and progressing over the years. I have a feeling that's kind of why the most recent expansion was not as well received as the previous ones, because the story dipped a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's each expansion has, if not introduced something new, but if not introduced something new, it has at least brought up to standard some of the stuff that was lagging, so that the
Mhm.
game by now is very well rounded. I like to think.
Gotcha. And it generally, you feel like they do a good job of, like, fixing old stuff while also introducing new content at the same time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd say so.
Something I didn't really, like, think about with live service games until probably a few years ago was, like, the importance of culling content sometimes, of just, like, there's this stuff over here that's everyone just hates it. It's like, it's there, and there might be something you want out of it, but just get rid of it and move that thing to somewhere else, when you have, like, an abundance of content kinda thing,
Oh
so
yeah,
but live service games, I think, are, like, one of the most fascinating ways to make games
yeah,
because it is this yeah, there's so much pressure, I feel like, from all directions, um, and I think the community in particular has, like, way more of an outsized impact on how a game is made versus, like, a $60 retail game or something like that.
yeah. And that's, yeah, kind of like, I like the game for that reason. There is that, like, fan feedback element of it. Um, But I also prefer the offline experience of, like, here's a group of people working in a room for a year or 2 making their own vision. I do sort of miss that sometimes.
Mhm,
You do get a lot of that in the MSQ. It's all original, high quality fantasy writing.
mhm.
In FF14, I really like that. Fan feedback it is fun to see things like FanFest. It is fun to see Yoshi P on stage, doling out information. Here's something we're doing because fans requested. That is all fun. I like that. But and I like that Yoshi P is sort of the face of all this. He's the jovial Square Enix dad who's he's holding our hand through this experience. Um, it does, though, at the end of the day, sort of reinforce that it is a live service game, that it is a product. Whereas, something like FF6, I bought it one time when I was 12, and now it's my favorite game. And that's all. Like, there's no updates coming. There's no community content. It's just here's a beautiful story that I played through when I was a kid that is still precious to me. FF14 doesn't quite fill the same role.
Hmm. Before the show, we were talking about the idea of the new Suikoden mobile game, and you were kind of like, I don't really want to mess with that kind of
Yeah.
thing. I'm curious, what do you feel like is the difference between something like that, like a gotcha mobile game, versus like an MMO as a live service game that you are willing to invest in one versus the other?
I think they're both very similar. The reason I like one over the other is because of individual people involved versus IP. Like, one of the things I've learned as I get older is don't just follow the IP that you like. Don't just follow a series that you like. You have to follow the people that you like. Uh, Turns out the guy that I like from Suikoden doesn't work on Suikoden anymore because he's very dead. Yoshitaka
Mhm.
Moriyama passed away a couple years ago, or last year actually, and he was kind of the heart and soul of the story of those games. Now a lot of his input was a collaboration with Junko Kawano, who did the art direction for several of the games. But that whole team working together put out at least two really good games that I like on the PS1. They left Konami. Junko came back to do some artwork for the Suikoden HD remasters. I don't know how much of the OG Suikoden team is coming back to do any of the new stuff. I don't think anybody is. I don't, there's folks working on that who may not have even played the game when they were kids. That's fine, but like it's the IP is now in the hands, so far removed from the people who kind of made it great. And that's not to say I don't have any faith in people I don't know. It's to say that I've been burned on this thing now so many times.
Yeah.
Same situation where it's like, well, no, we're going to wait for it to come out. Give it a week or a month or a year, and we'll see how the buzz is. But like, no day one purchases anymore. No hype anymore. I am not getting excited for anything anymore because it only leads to disappointment. If you follow the creators that you like, the people that you like, even the small outfits that you like, there's a much better chance something is going to be produced that is fun. I like what Yoshi P does.
Yeah.
He heads this thing up very sensibly. He and I think Koji Fox kind of guided him through that process initially. What's it called? Is it a zero punctuation documentary? The one that no clip. It's a
No,
no
no
clip.
clip. Yeah.
The one about how FF14 was a disaster and then got good. And they
Mhm.
cover things like, well, the whole office got together and played Warcraft and was like, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is good. And basically learned what's good instead of trying to make FF11 2.0, which ironically is what I wanted. And now I'm glad I didn't get. I feel like Yoshi P is very sensible when it comes to balancing what the fans want with, what's good for Square Enix.
I was going back and reading a bunch of what's his name? Hiromichi Tanaka, is that his name? The guy who is kind of the lead guy on Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV 1.0.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interviews with him during the beta period for Final Fantasy 14. And it's really fascinating to see how confused he seems to be
Oh no.
about what people want. Because he was talking about, like, he's like, the problem we're running into with Final Fantasy 11 is people are saying that they can't get parties with other people. And so we have to find ways to get people connected with each other. And he's like, but the problem I have with Final Fantasy 14 is nobody wants to play with each other. And he's like, so we've made all this content that's intended to be party based, but nobody's doing it. They're just doing the single player content. And then he's like, so I don't, it seems like he's just confused about what it's, and they made this game and then suddenly he's having to correct in the beta test before launch
Oh
to be
boy.
like, people want to play this alone apparently. So it's really interesting to go through and just see him in like real time, every beta give feedback of just immense confusion.
Oh
So,
boy. I mean,
so
yeah, it's good that they stumbled upon that eventually because that's one of the reasons I kept playing the game
mm,
14 even after I had to start paying for it was because of the party finder and duty finder systems. Because that always was the worst part of 11 was standing in Juneau and shouting 75 Sam LFP Crystal Braves blah blah blah, blah, blah. And just you get 5 people and you're like I've only got 45 minutes left to do this and one person's like I gotta go drive my dog to the airport and so the whole party just falls apart and you're like no I was so close. And like there's none of that. Well, there's some of that in 14, but much less. It's when you need a dungeon, you put yourself in the queue, you register, It pops when 3 other people want to do the same content as you. You are immediately transported to the content. You do the content, you warp back to where you were. It's done. Dungeons take 15 to 20 minutes. Bosses maybe 10 to 15 minutes. It's all very quick. It's a game that is designed to be played by normal human adults who have normal human adult schedules, and that's why I appreciate it.
One thing
14. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say one thing I was always kind of uncertain about with 14 because when I played Final Fantasy 14, as somebody who's played a lot of Final Fantasy 11 beforehand, I found it to be a very isolating experience. And even Final Fantasy 14 1.0 is a lot more group driven, all those smaller groups than what 11 was asking for. Um, and so one of the problems I had playing 14 was like I could not figure out, and maybe at the time I wasn't realizing that I was trying to figure this out, like how to actually engage with people in 14. Because when I would play, I would do Duty Finder where you just get randomly partied up with people and then you never see them again, right? And even with Party Finder, I felt like it was a pretty limited list of things that was on Party Finder. This was like 2.0 era, so it was like usually if I was trying to find something to do, I couldn't find it on that Party Finder list most of the time. But you could make the argument that maybe I should just make my own group. so, but I guess the thing that has always confused me is like where, as an online game where you're interacting with other people, where does community play a role in Final Fantasy 14, and like where do you make those touch points?
It is sort of analogous to FF11 where you have a link shell. And the link shell is just kind of where you BS with your friends back and forth while you're waiting for, your party to show up. Hey,
Mhm.
I'm stuck in Crawler's Nest for 30 minutes waiting for this white mage. Let's talk to the link shell. FF14 has the free company, which is sort of the equivalent of that.
Mhm.
Just a group of friends who are playing together. Um, but it's similar to forming an experience party in 11 where I'm gonna meet up with these 5 people. Somebody sent me a tell from this dungeon. They need me to sub in. I'm gonna go in, level with them for an hour or two. They are, not to say disposable relationships, but they are temporary. Like we are temporary comrades.
Mhm.
In the case of 14, it's not necessarily to level; it's to do the content.
Yeah.
And in 11, it's for the purpose of leveling, or maybe doing a boss fight.
'Cause the
Um,
thing with a duty finder, you literally cannot reach out to most people because it's people coming from different servers, right? At least back in the day, I don't know if the data servers are different now, but like people would be brought in from different servers and they'd be gone and you had no way to communicate with them afterwards, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
you could. Well, actually, yeah, I don't know if this is new or not because I never paid attention to it. But their name and their server are still on screen after the party disbands.
Mm.
Um, if maybe they have to have said something in chat. I don't know, but like their name is there if they've said anything in chat, or if it appears anywhere else in the log, you can click on it and you can send them a message. So there is a way to communicate with people past that experience. But, and also you don't have to, which is great because that's kind of one of the things that I like is I always hated in 11 having to scrounge together a group to do something. And in 14, it's so nice that the game does all of that for me. It does all of the awkward, hello, I saw that you needed to castle Sval Bailey's.
Well, one thing that I kind of feel, and this might be like where we kind of differentiate, is that like a lot of times, unless I really force myself to interact with somebody, I won't.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
I've played VR chat, and what I have to do when I play VR chat is I have to leave the microphone unmuted, or else I will never talk. I'll just sit
Wow.
there, and so I'll just be quiet. But if it's unmuted, my impulsiveness might come through and I might say something to somebody. The
Wow.
dude that's like in their like Fox avatar smoking a blunt talking, I might actually say something to them. And so like with Final Fantasy 11, one of the things that's interesting about that is there are like dungeons and things like that where it's like you literally cannot navigate this without another person. In old school Final Fantasy 11. So like there'll be like a dungeon where you go and there's like a lever and one of the player has to hit the lever and flip the lever for the other
Oh
player,
God. Yeah.
and every time you want to go down there, every time you have to get somebody for whatever little dumb thing you need down there. You have to get somebody. And so I think it is I would say generally a positive thing for me that I need to interact with somebody to do it. And like 99% of the time I will never talk to them again.
Yeah.
But sometime you will join their link shell because you mentioned earlier it's like, oh, you get into your link shell and your free company. And I don't know if other than like people just like shouting social shell if you want it kind of thing, I don't think I ever joined a shell or free company in 14 that I ever felt connected with because I didn't know anybody
Yeah,
in there. And so it was like really hard for me to engage. But it might just have something to do with like how I break the ice. Unless I really push myself to do something, I just won't do it
yeah.
kind of thing. So
I That's interesting because I'm the exact opposite. I always keep my mic muted, uh, because well, if I'm so I do FF14 raids via Discord
mm,
where I set it up as push to talk, and I mapped talk to my L1 button, and I unmapped it from the game, so that anytime I want to talk, I just hold L1. I play on controller
mhm.
like a weirdo, and because I am constantly speaking to myself or at the game, and I don't want to seem like an insane person. You know, it's all my all my teammates, just saying things to myself, talking to myself. Now, as a result, the downside of that is sometimes people say that I'm very quiet when it's just no. I mean, if you were in the room, you would not be saying that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but that going back to the whole thing of having people hit switches for you, that is cool. I like that element of it the first time.
Yeah.
The first time you have to hit a switch or have a switch hit for you, you really feel like you're working together with someone to do something. But like after that, if I have the option of doing a little quest to get that pouch of weighted stones for Garlage Citadel so I don't have to have people standing on switches with me, I will do that 100% of the time. I will get the portal charm for the ruins so I don't have to get a red mage, a black mage, and a white mage to stand on these things for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, like, to me, it's almost like I don't wanna go to the DMV, but if I do the website for the DMV, I'll never potentially ever like, talk to somebody, and it's like 0.01% chance that relationship will last longer than that, but at
Wow.
least, like, I tried it kinda thing, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's, like, kinda the mindset I have because there's definitely a lot of people who complain about that on the rollback servers, like, "They should just put this in because it would solve me so much headaches." But I'm like, "This is kind of the point of this version of Final Fantasy 11, I feel like, is to, for me, force you to do things, where you're forced to interact with the community in some ways.
And yeah, I don't mind
So
doing that once,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know? But it is that's boy, FF11 really is like the DMV, the more I think about it.
It is, yes.
The more it's just a hostile environment that doesn't want you there. It's constantly trying to spit you out. Your driver's license is sort of a rare exclusive item. It's
Yeah.
non-transferable. Yeah.
I do want to kind of shift the conversation to probably actually my biggest problem with Final Fantasy 14, and it sounds like you had maybe a similar issue with me, but maybe it wasn't as big of a deal later on for you, is the combat.
Oh, yeah.
Um, when I play Final Fantasy 14, keeping the driving metaphors going, I feel like it is like when I'm driving in a super busy city where there's stuff going on all around me and I cannot parse anything except for stay in the lane in front of me, don't hit the car in front of me
Yeah.
kind of thing. I get very like overwhelmed by it. And so what ends up happening, I feel like with Final Fantasy 14 is, there's the whole rotation system. You have to do your little rotation. And then, while you're doing that, the boss is doing attacks and there's little circles that show up on the floor and then you have to dodge those, right? And I generally find that I find it overwhelming, and then I cannot find what is satisfying about it.
Okay.
Because like in Final Fantasy 11, I think because everything's so slow, where you're hitting, and I probably shouldn't be using Final Fantasy 11 as much, but like I think slower animations and like these really visible hits to characters where a character gets hit and this big, blood splash comes off them or a spark, you hear the sound effect of but Final Fantasy 14, everything is happening all at once, and there's just all this noise and all these visual effects going on, and numbers are popping up, and I don't know what I'm getting out of it in some ways, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It
Like,
that does make sense. Um so the end game where you really kind of have to start concentrating on the combat, to
mhm,
me, in that sensory way was actually very similar to FF11 because the few times I did do end game stuff in FF11, like Dynamis, you're in a zone with 64 people. You
mhm,
have to go to your config and turn off their effects and turn off their sounds and turn off all of their animations and stuff. And 14 is very much the same way. You need to go to config immediately and just disable everybody else's stuff so that you're only seeing your own. That is the first step to make it a lot more legible. The second step is fiddling with the UI. The 14 offers a very, very robust GUI customization menu to allow you to
Let me
put stuff
stop you real
wherever you like.
quick.
Hi.
Because I think what I'm more interested in is like, what do you find satisfying in Final Fantasy XIV's combat? I think, like, I told you what I think is my problem with it, but I think a lot of those things in offering them up, I probably shouldn't have. Is I think those are me trying to find things that makes it not work for me, and I think really what I'm looking for is what do you value in Final Fantasy XIV's combat system more than anything?
Oh boy. It is the only game I play that demands high response and memorization and teamwork and reading and reacting to things on the fly, because ordinarily I don't like games like that.
Yeah, you typically play like turn-based RPGs.
Yes, I want
You're
a
a Dragon Quest
slow ass
guy.
EQ. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like my idea of an exciting evening is playing Picross in bed at the end of the day. Like that's
Yeah, yeah.
that's how I unwind. So the
Which is
reason that
funny because I'm on the opposite side of that, where I need an RPG with like 30 billion gauges, and
that's
unless,
14.
yeah, and for some reason we're flip flopped on this
Yeah,
one.
I think this is like a holdover from when I started playing the game, and I wanted to try out everything the game had to offer, and
Mhm.
I could not find a group to do the high end content at the stage I was at. And it was always this mystical thing, this one part of the game I just can't do. And so when I finally started doing it, it was very exciting to me, and I just wanted to keep doing it because it is very much a challenge. And part of it is I don't enjoy having to do this, but I feel like it's something I have to do. Is forcing myself to socialize with 7 other nerds every week is good for me, a hermit who lives and works alone.
Mm, mm.
Because as you know, I used to run a video game bar here in Japan for 10 years. I closed it down last year and have since been working from home, doing voiceover work and all sorts of other stuff. And I need a regular human interaction with other people a few times a week in order to stay sane. Because, and I think we've all experienced this where like you have a couple days off and you don't go out or do anything. And then when you do eventually go out, it's like you're blinded by the sun. You don't remember how to interact with people. It sucks. Every conversation is awkward. And by forcing myself to interact with people, that's helping me on that front. Gameplay wise, I do enjoy the challenge of it because we are all of us suffering together trying to take down this boss. And when the content is fresh, that's when it's the most fun because we're all figuring it out together. When you're doing old content, it's just all right. Everyone watch this video from 5 years ago that somebody put on YouTube, and then we'll start practice on Monday. And here it's just like nobody's done a video, nobody knows what the fight is. Everyone's going. It was the same excitement in FF11 Endgame where you've got things like Pandemonium Warden where nobody knows what the hell its deal is, or Jailer of Virtue or whatever, where you don't know how to lock out the 2 hours or what you're supposed to do to kill it. There's a lot of mystery. That mystery is more temporary in 14, but the fun of the fight and figuring out the fight is why I like those.
I want to get back to that, but I think I still don't know the what you like in the combat specifically, right? Because this sounds like a lot more higher level things of like how do we strategize with other people, and how do we overcome this fight, and a lot of that is like planning, right? And then it sounds like what I have kind of gathered from some people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's almost like this rhythm game esque feeling to playing Final Fantasy 14, where it's like everybody needs to move and everybody needs to execute at this particular, I don't know, frequency or something like that, right? There's like damage checks to make sure you've done enough damage. There's like certain, movements you might need to make, things like that. But that is more of like, in some ways, zoning out and just letting the repetition work.
Oh, I see.
So,
Well,
so I don't know
yeah,
if that's true, but that's my assumption. But I don't
right.
really know.
No, that is true. And if that was all the game was, it would be incredibly boring. But
Mm,
the nuance is you are doing that. You are doing your rotation while you are spinning plates, while you are dodging AoEs and being in the right place at the right time. And this really comes into play in the high end content where like, you're hitting the boss and then suddenly the boss he randomly marks 4 players with a specific marker that mean, oh, you need to be in this location within the next 20 seconds or everybody dies.
yeah.
But you also need to be keeping up your rotation while you're doing that. You need to be hitting all of your moves at the right time as soon as they're ready. And it's doing those two things together that makes it engaging. I think that makes it a fun challenge.
Gotcha. And turning off, like, all the effects and stuff you mentioned earlier that
That
either
helps.
simplifies that, because in some ways I would feel like if that's, like, the fun, having all the visual noise might make it more,
No,
like,
it's
more entertaining,
no.
but I guess it depends how you look at it.
I don't I don't know anybody who plays FF14 with all the effects on. That's just
Yeah, yeah,
silly.
yeah.
Like if you're playing through the main scenario and you're not doing high-end stuff, I think it's fine.
Mhm,
It doesn't matter. It's not too overwhelming because basic content is only 4 characters per dungeon, 8
mhm.
players per boss. Um, Alliance raids are 24 people, which starts to get a little crazy. But the high end and the savage and the ultimate content, that's still only 8 people.
Mhm.
So it's not the end of the world. You should still turn off those effects though. Because just to make everything legible on the screen.
I know you're primarily doing endgame, but, like, and I know you said earlier that you weren't a huge fan of, like, the build up, but is there anything in that process? Because Final Fantasy XIV, if you play it from the beginning, is an incredibly long game where you're not gonna be at endgame anytime soon. Like, what do you think is the thing, if you're playing, that is the appeal that sticks you on in that regard?
What do you mean?
Like, from the combat perspective, because I think what you're talking about
Oh,
with combat seems to be a lot more associated with the end game aspect of,
yes.
you need to be perfect, where I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like lower level dungeons, there's probably, like, specific mechanics you're dodging, but the general fights probably have a lot of flexibility, I'd imagine, so.
Yes. Yeah, it's yeah, the general content is pretty accessible. It's challenging enough. Like it's not as
Mhm,
easy as just do your rotation on everything. Like you do still have to dodge stuff and know which mechanics are what. Like the early dungeons teach you from a very early stage, this is a stack marker. This means everyone needs to stack together. These are AoE markers. These means you need to spread out. This boss is charging up this move. It means you have to do this. This is all doled out to you over time so that you kind of build up a knowledge base in order to continue with the game. And yeah, for a lot of people, that level of challenge is enough. And that's fine. For me, for many, many years, that was enough for me.
but it's the same appeal, you feel like, where it is still trying to balance those plates while you're integrating with, or using those mechanics, I guess?
I think so. I think it's very pleasing to resolve all of those things together,
Mm,
to pull something off and feel like you're functioning as part of a team at the same time.
yeah.
Which is also fed in part by the role system. The fact that FF11, you could get away with wacky parties. Like there was no rule. Like you could have a summoner healing. You could have 2 ninjas. You could have any whatever. You could have 6 paladins. I don't know. It doesn't matter. FF14 has very strict rules. If you're doing most content, you need 1 tank, 1 healer, 2 DPS for 4-person content, or 2 tanks, 2 healers, 4 DPS for high end content.
Mhm.
And that kind of forces you to act within your role. And to me, makes it feel like I'm contributing more to the team. My role in the team has been predefined,
Mhm.
and I am by doing my rotation, by dodging these attacks, I am contributing to our success by doing everything a DPS is supposed to do. I'm doing maximum damage. I'm taking minimal damage, and I'm just having a gosh darn fun time while I'm doing it.
So one of the biggest complaints I hear these days about 14 is that the jobs are not defined enough.
That's
That
true.
these jobs all feel way too similar. Because you
Yeah,
mentioned there's the tank role, the support role, and the healer role.
yeah.
No, sorry, damage dealer role. And then another thing I've heard as well is that certain roles are not as important anymore. Like, I've heard a
Eh,
lot of complaints about tanks not being needed in lower level content. I don't know how true that is, but there's
um,
people that are like, "Oh, these fights don't even require me to have the complete set of roles here."
well, by and large, the traditional set of roles is still required. Like saying that you don't need a tank for early content is probably true, but the
Mm.
pain in the ass it would be to set up that party is more than it's worth. It's easier to just put yourself in Party Finder, wait for a tank,
I think the
or
bigger thing is that my job doesn't feel important.
right. Well, yes, but in this instance particularly, that
Mhm.
may only apply to the lower levels, but
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
every role is important. Every
Yeah.
role is required to do. Like when we do new Savage content when it drops, um, everybody needs to be giving their all because these fights are on a time limit. You know, there's a like an enrage counter
Is
where
Savage the current, like, main end game at the moment for the game, or
yes, there's also
okay,
ultimate fights which are above that.
okay.
But Savage is there's
But
new
within
Savage
that
coming out
realm,
too. Yes.
right, you are at the end of the path when you're in that realm. Okay.
And that's the kind of stuff where like I've been in groups many times. This has happened multiple times where we die after
Mhm.
10 minutes of fighting when the boss is at 0.1% life.
Mm, mm.
And that is for any number of reasons. But it all, you know, we need to be doing enough damage. Tanks need to have high enough defense and cooldowns ready to take tank busters. And if they screw that up, you know, white mages or other healers need to be around to heal everybody, top everybody off, raise people who have died. Downtime is a big issue in dealing with this kind of stuff. Every role is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, maybe a particular role isn't required for super low level content, but who's doing that anyway, and what's the point of doing that
Yeah.
anyway? It's
In
yeah,
some ways, I think being able to do it is probably, like, a fun challenge in its own of just, like, I
yeah,
wanna
for
do this
funsies.
fight without a tank kinda thing. Uh, so the maybe the bigger thing then to look at is the job system itself. I think when I've talked to you before, you were like, "I like looking like a samurai with
Yeah,
big sword," and then, like, what comes after that doesn't matter
it
so
doesn't matter.
much.
Yeah.
Do you find that's true for most people who play the game at this point? Like when somebody's choosing a job these days, what would you recommend to them most to consider, I guess?
I would say first choose a role that you like, either tank, healer, or DPS, and then if you're choosing tank, just choose whatever looks cool because it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter aside from that. There's two kinds of healer. There's shield healer and pure healer. You know, there's two jobs of each of those, and those there's not a huge difference there gameplay wise. DPS is probably where there's the most variety because you've got melee DPS, magic DPS, and ranged DPS.
Mhm.
So, you know, ask somebody, do you want to be a frontline fighter? Do you want to be a mage? Or do you want to be like a bard who stays back and fires arrows? That's about it.
Yeah.
There's, yeah, three main kinds of DPS, I would say. It all comes down to an aesthetic choice or a gameplay choice. FF11 had, FF11 encouraged
Well, actually, I wanna go
experimentation.
back a little bit.
Yeah.
Gameplay choice. What is the gameplay choice, I guess? Like,
Um, that's more like, do you want to be frontline or backline? Because by
okay.
and large, your rotations are about the same from job to job. There is very little variation. There are certain tweaks that jobs receive every update or expansion. You know, like there have been a couple of like every time they introduce a new job, it tends to be overpowered to get people to play it.
Yeah.
Last expansion, Endwalker, when Reaper came out, it was a little bit OP. It slowly started to drop off after that. Pictomancer in the most recent expansion, when that came out, was extremely overpowered. It might still be. I don't know if they've nerfed it yet, but like but over time, everything kind of levels out,
Yeah.
and that's so that they can fine tune these fights to be the way they are,
Mhm.
which on one hand I do appreciate. On the other hand, I do sort of miss the flying by the seat of your pants patchwork party that you could do things with in FF11.
Yeah, yeah. Um, with the front and the back row, like, what is probably the big difference between those? Is it the type of dodging you're doing is different, or, like, what is the importance of choosing between a front or a back row DD job?
Um, yeah, it's
Or whatever job it is, sorry, I don't know if it's just DD, but
I
or
mean, yeah,
gameplay.
the maneuvers you have to do, the places you have to be, attacks you might have to bait. You know, if for example, right now, my group and I are trying. We have been slowly over months working through the Alexander Ultimate fight,
Mm,
and in a way, it's supposed to be harder than Savage, and overall it is. In a way, it's a little easier because everything is so specific. Like, okay, melee one does this at this point, then they move here, then they do this. Range number two has to be here at this point to bait this attack, and then move over here. It's all very straightforward in that sense. Those are all preset responsibilities that you have to remember based on your job and who you are in the party makeup. In regular content, it's really just more an issue of if you're melee, always be in range of the monster, always be doing damage. If you're ranged, always be as far away as you can, and throwing up support buffs or whatever when you want to.
Mm,
It's really just what kind of job you want to do. Do you want to be on the front lines or do you want to be on the back?
gotcha. When it comes to the job system, what would you say is like your favorite part of it right now? And what would you say is the thing that you'd like to see improved most right now?
Oh boy, I don't know. I don't know that I have a favorite part of it, just because it's so utilitarian. It does the basic thing that it sets out to do, which is we made a
Mm.
balanced game where everyone can do these boss fights with any party makeup as long as all the roles are filled. That's the balancing act that they're trying to maintain.
Is that a good thing for you?
Um, I'd say now it is. I think if I were younger, I would I would prefer FF11's approach. Um, but yeah, obviously the thing I don't like about that is a lot of the characters are the jobs are a little too samey. There's not a whole lot of like in FF11, you could have differences. You have different gear sets that you take with you. You swap out with a macro when you do a weapon skill. I kind of like that I don't have to do that in 11 because it's a huge pain in the ass, or in 14 rather. In FF14, I like it and I don't like it. I don't
Yeah.
like it because there's one best armor set for everybody, with a few
Mm,
exceptions. Like if you're doing a speed build, maybe you want something different. But by and large, every job at any given point has a best in slot that you should get.
mm,
And I have best in slot on Samurai right now. It's not nearly as rewarding as it was piecing together bit by bit all the little stuff in FF11 that I camped Argus for the Peacock Charm for like 3 months.
mm,
I got that Bushi no Mimi samurai earring from the Crystal Braves fight in Sky. That took me a month. Like those feel like I really put in the work for them in a different way that 14 feels. 14 feels
yeah.
like I did practice and worked hard. It's more a test of skill than it is of patience, or it's both.
Yeah.
Whereas 11 was really more patience.
Yeah. 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 So a lot of it comes down to, you think, just like at the end of the day, knowing your job's execution
Yeah.
more than
It
anything. And
is.
and it sounds like there's kind of one way to play that job, and then it kind of fits within this very broad scope of what a damage dealer is. So we don't ever really ask that job of too much beyond what's baked into it. Is that, would you say it's like an accurate statement?
Yes, and that's why I prefer Samurai, because it's a pure damage dealer. It doesn't have
Mhm.
any support abilities to speak of.
Yeah.
Um, I think all the other damage dealers have some sort of support. Um, Samurai's just no, get up there, do as much damage as possible, and that's
Mhm.
it.
In terms of everybody else choosing their job, is there any kind of dynamic going on of like, this job is, you mentioned support abilities, like, is this a job that better interacts with other players? Is it like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, how do the jobs work together, because you're in groups doing content, right? And so does that matter at all, or is it just as long as you're there as that role, that's all that really matters?
Um, so Yoshi P and the team they've said multiple times,
Mhm.
any party makeup can clear any content.
Okay.
And I have to believe that they have tested that and they know that to be true. In practice, I don't know. I'm sure it's true, but I've been in some situations where, like, I think that's true if everyone is playing the best they possibly can. Because I
Yeah.
have been in situations where I've been trying to do a fight with a particular party makeup. We can't do it. Um, we swap out one player for another, and then suddenly we do it or swap out one job for another, and
Yeah.
suddenly it becomes possible. Um, there's just little variations and things like that. But I think by and large, it's all meant to be done by anybody.
Gotcha. When it comes to the appeal of the game from a gameplay perspective, is there anything you feel like we haven't really touched on at this point? Like, I feel like I'm still not 100% sure if I get what the appeal is, but I think I'm getting the idea that it has something to do with the just maintaining that core rotation and maintaining the um not taking damage. And then like, it sounds like the job doesn't really play a role in that too much. So I guess like I'm still trying to figure out, like, is there anything more than that, or does that sound like that's just it? This is the game, and if you can't appreciate that, then it's probably not something that you're going to be
Well,
interested in.
we have focused this one aspect of the game. Yes, this is the battle system. but
Yeah, yeah.
there
Well,
is
yeah, when we're talking about combat
so
and
much more.
gameplay,
Yeah.
yes, if w I wanna go beyond that, but for gameplay perspective, is that kind of the core?
Well, I mean, not
Of
from a
it?
gameplay perspective, from a combat perspective, because there is so
True.
much more gameplay to it.
Yeah.
There's housing, there's crafting, there's collecting minions, mounts, there's, if you're crazy and want to buy a house, buy a house. You can host parties there. You
Mhm.
can you can do erotic role playing with all your friends after hours. That's an option.
It's
There's
almost like it's almost the world aspect of it and
Yes,
progression,
that you
right?
would get
Right.
from many other MMOs as well. But
Yeah.
the thing that ties that all together for me is the story. I really like the story and the characters, which is something that is often overlooked because it's an MMO.
Mhm.
Anytime when I was running the bar, anytime I would try to talk to people about FF14, I would always lead with the story because I think it's really good, and they would always go, "No, I don't like MMOs." Like, all right, but it doesn't fucking it's still a good story.
Yeah.
How can it
Well,
not
what would
have a
you
good
say is
story?
kind of the general strengths of it without getting, like, too into details? Because this is, like, a 10-year-old game, so I don't wanna, like, go story beat by story beat, but, like, what do you think it does really well in that regard?
It and this is an advantage that, a long living live service game like this has is because the story is over 10 years old, you've had a lot of time and several expansions to flesh out these characters and go on adventures with them. Um, and I gotta say, like, when I started playing 2.0, I was skipping the cutscenes. I was skipping everything just to get where my friends were so I could play with them.
Mhm.
And then after I had caught up with and exceeded them, I now had to wait for them, and so I started watching the cutscenes, and I was like, "Oh, wait, this is good, I think." I was really surprised, and so I went back, I started a new character, and I started watching all the cutscenes, I was like, "Oh, okay, I know who that is now." And it started getting better from there, and that all the initial 10 years of lore culminated in, with Endwalker in 2021, which was a great
Mhm,
cap off
mhm.
to this beautiful story, and, Dawn Trail last year was the start of a new story, which I think is where it lost some people because you're now start doing the hard work of introducing new characters and starting a new tale.
Yeah, the investment has been lost at this
Yes.
point.
And, all
Mhm.
the old characters still hang around and they're still kind of on the periphery, but they're not the main focus anymore,
Yeah, yeah.
which I think is
In
what
ter
put people off.
in terms of, like, the core themes of the story, because like, when I think about, um like, Final Fantasy XI had some very specific core themes where it was like, okay, here's a bunch of race relation stuff, right? Where there's all these diverse races and they all hate each other. So how does that work itself out between all the cities? And then from there, it evolves into almost like a meta narrative where it's like, what does it? What does a world that doesn't really exist matter? Right. That's kind of like where Final Fantasy XI kind of goes without
Yeah.
getting too detail about it.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's like when I think about the overall scale of what Final Fantasy XI's narrative does, I think it is that kind of transition from hyper-focused racial narrative to what does all this even mean? I guess.
Yeah.
So like what do you think is like how Final Fantasy XIV develops narratively through I guess the initial story because it sounds like Dawn Trail's kind of up in the air of where's that's going to go at this point.
Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of parallels to FF11. Although the race relation stuff is still there, although the cities
mhm,
and city states not quite getting along is still there. They've introduced just an evil empire, of course, and all the things that go down with that. Chemical warfare becomes an issue at one point, and like trying to not spoil anything, but a lot of different angles are kind of introduced. A lot of different characters show up. It's really hard to talk about a story without spoiling it,
yeah,
and
yeah,
also trying to point out the highlights. But yeah, over 10 years, it was kind of like how I felt after I watched the last few Avengers movies. Because like for 10 years, I got really into this cinematic universe, and then I watched Endgame, and I was like, "Oh, that was a good cap off." But then they
yeah.
kept making movies, and I'm like, "Why? I'm done though. Why are you still making these? Like, I already saw the story. I don't care about this one." And I was just done. Like that was my checkout point.
Yeah.
And I feel that, like, maybe on a subconscious level, that's kind of where a lot of people are with Dawn Trail, where it's like, "No, but we already resolved it."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that specifically.
Do you think that Final Fantasy 14 as an ongoing narrative does anything particularly better versus like cuz I hate reading like ongoing manga
Yeah,
because it's like this is going to move at a snail's pace and then they're going to announce that it's not they're like this stopped making money So we're gonna wrap up the story in the next month, and then you're gonna get a very unsatisfying conclusion. And so like a lot of times I'm like, these narratives that go on forever seem like they never pay off.
Yeah.
And they seem like they last forever. And unless you really want to invest to where you literally are reading this story for a decade plus, right? Like like it's hard for me to care. Um
Yeah, it's FF14 does both. FF14
yeah.
every expansion. So for example, the recent Dawn Trail 7.0,
Mm,
I think every expansion runs from point 0 to point 5 or 0.55.
mhm,
Um, the point 0 is the big beefy base of the new story,
mhm,
all the way up to point 1. And that's a not maybe not a full game's length of content, but it's a lot. I mean, it's
mhm.
if you're watching all the cutscenes, it's probably 20 hours or so to do all the content, watch all the scenes. And to me, that's the point of the expansion to me is the new story.
Yeah.
Um, FF14 occupies the space in my mind and heart where Final Fantasy as a series used to occupy. Because Final Fantasy as a series now is not marketed towards me. I'm no longer the demographic for it's an action game now. That's not my jam.
Not
Um,
even Yoshida's game?
no, not even no. That's it's Devil May Cry with a different guy. Like that's not my kind of game. And FF14 does have more action focused combat, but it's not nearly the same thing. Like there, I am still beholden to the rotation, which to me is almost a kind of turn based because you're waiting for that thing to come up before you do anything.
It's
Um,
16's like a character action game kind of thing where it's all about juggling and things like that as far
that's
as I
right. Yeah, yeah.
understand. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they got the guy from DMC to head up the
Yeah, yeah,
combat. Like
yeah.
that's, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy that. That's great, but they need to do that because that's what popular, that's what sells, that's what makes money. That's their job.
Yeah.
Um, I now look forward to FF14 expansions the way I used to look forward to Final Fantasy games
Mm.
because it's something fun and familiar. I know the characters are going to be likable. I know that we're going to have a fantastic adventure. Um, and I can go about playing the game at my own pace. I can walk around and do quests. And when it's time to do bosses or dungeons, I will focus up for 10 to 15 minutes and then go right back to playing relaxed gameplay.
Is there like an alignment with the Final Fantasy type stories in the past that you appreciate? Because like when I think about like narratively, what do I like about Final Fantasy, right? And I think for me, it's not even so much the narrative as is the world. I like seeing new worlds.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 16's world does not look appealing to me, but I appreciate that it looks different from anything else Final Fantasy has done at this point, right? And so like that is like the exciting thing for me. So like from a Final Fantasy perspective, what excites you about those narratives, and then how does that apply to 14?
Um, yeah, I think the world building in 14 is a key factor in that. A lot of the characters, a lot of accents happening, just a lot of
Yeah.
flavorful personalities. Um, one of the things I particularly enjoy about 14 is I realized this in the previous expansion, but a lot of the storytelling is done in the style of Japanese pro wrestling,
Okay.
where so like I didn't discover Japanese wrestling until 2017, and the first thing I noticed about it was there's no like my idea of American wrestling is very much here's a beefy man on a microphone yelling at somebody for way too long. Why don't you do a wrestle? Why don't you put down the mic? Why don't you write him a letter and then send it later and wrestle now? And that's the show that I came to see. Japanese pro wrestling very much does the storytelling in the ring,
Hmm.
where these two wrestlers have a history. This guy is using his opponent's sensei's finishing move on him, and that says a lot. That's a huge insult. Like that kind of stuff happens. The only time a Japanese wrestler gets on the mic is the very end of the show for 90 seconds to say, I'm very happy I won. I'll be defending my title at Wrestle Kingdom next week. Get home safe, everybody. That's it. Like there's no diatribes. There's no American wrestlers on the mic for 5 to 10 minutes. It's all done organically as a part of the experience. And FF14, I feel, does that very well. I don't know if that's a Japanese design aesthetic, but it's great. And I love when it happens when a move name or A line, a tiny line of dialogue that a boss says in the middle of a fight is meant. Like Final Fantasy as a series has been doing this since FF4. They've been putting scenes into the battles for so long, and I feel like 14 is the first one to do it this well in a long time. Things, surprises mid fight, character reveals mid fight. Like you're focusing because you're doing your rotation, you're dodging attacks. Then there's a brief pause while a cutscene plays out, and you have to go right back into rotation brain. And it's exciting. I really like that about the combination of the plot and the action together.
So it actually stops the game to give you that narrative. Because, like,
Yeah.
to me, if there's text on screen while I'm playing, that text might as well not exist,
No,
right?
it's
So it's just like
yeah, no, it's I believe the HUD disappears. Like there's no shift. There's no fade out, fade in. It's just HUD disappears, camera refocuses usually on the boss or a character.
Mm.
Dialogue happens, and it's generous with the time. It doesn't thrust you immediately back into the fight. It's very generous with letting you get your bearings again and then saying, "Okay, 3 2 1, we're back in."
Yeah, yeah. Um, for the narrative reset part, where like they were like, "We have finished this story." You
Yes.
are professional creative writer. I forget what you told me last time what your thing was.
Uh,
You have a degree
in creative
in
writing,
creative writing.
don't know if I've ever used it, but I'm good with a word.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, when I don't know a lot about how creative writing works in college. I took a course once. So, like, I think we just showed up. We're like, write a short story. It can't have a twist at the end because everyone wants to put a twist at the end of their story.
Oh boy.
Um, and and that's like about all I remember. I remember writing a poem about like my socks having holes in them.
Oh sure,
And I was like, sure, I guess, because I have to get a grade for this.
right?
Now I'm gonna leave this class and never do this again. um, so I can't put to words the structure of a story. That doesn't mean you explain that here now. I don't know how a story's structured. If I were to write a story, it would be 100% by gut. Um, when you look at the type of narrative Final Fantasy XIV's telling, do you see like, is there a way when you learn through creative writing, like, to reset a plot? Is there like a structured way to do that? Or is this weird, like, long tail story thing that Final Fantasy 14 is doing a more unique thing to this kind of space that
I
you don't necessarily learn about through creative writing and things like that?
Yeah, I don't think it's that tied to creative writing because this is a problem that all MMOs have had to deal with, and they all typically have had the same solution, and that is, oh no, there's a continent we never knew about.
Yeah.
Every MMO, when it's time to introduce a new expansion, we forgot about this whole place in the ocean. Let's go there now and have adventures. And that's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
Dawn Trail does. Is the initial map has everything surrounded by clouds, and then every expansion, a
Mhm.
few more clouds get shifted aside, and we can see this new continent. And it's fine. I get it. It's one of those things you just have to accept when you're dealing with an MMO that's going to be constantly updated.
I feel like they try. They'll be like I think in 2.0 that Mamul Jaw, which are these big lizard men, they had a Mamul Jaw just hanging out in town. He's like, "Hey, he's here." And it's like, I guess you could view that as a teaser for the latest expansion that eventually they got there, right? Even though that launched 10 years ago and that guy was just standing in that room and it's just like, "Hey,
Oh
guy."
wow, wow! I didn't
So
know that there was a Mamulja in a
in,
2.0?
Limsa Lamensa, I think?
Wow,
There's some room there, and they just have one hanging out in there,
cool.
and he's just there for you. Like, I feel like they try that, right? Like, I feel like they in their lore, they say, "This is what we're gonna try to do," and, I have briefly managed, like, a lore writing team before, and usually it's just, like, a bunch of people working on a lot of things that often won't get surfaced for years.
Yeah,
And so they want people to know though, like the writer wants people to like, I made this whole lore about this island over here, and it's just one page right now. But someday that one page will be a whole document. And I need to put it somewhere in the game. kinda thing. So, I feel like 14 does try to do that at least, but I haven't kept up with the story, so I don't really know.
I will
Uh
say there has been a surprising amount of lore cohesion bridging this expansion with 2.0 content. There's a boss in 2.0 content. There's a Mamulja boss with a specific name, and in here all the way now, in 2024, last year in 7.0, this Mamulja is mentioned. Oh yeah, there was one of us who went over to the New World years ago, and he headed up a band of bandits, and he lived in this abandoned temple, and like
Mhm.
oh yeah, that's the one I killed years ago when I played
Oh,
2.0.
yeah,
I
yeah,
never
yeah.
thought about him until here again, but they do things like that. Like they'll go back and change things to be consistent. Like they introduced there's an old 2.0 dungeon called World of Darkness, and then in one of the 6.0 post game quests, you go back into this world briefly, and you
Mhm,
learn that things there die in a specific way. When things die, they disappear into a black mist. And
mhm.
somebody, I think, said to Yoshi P, "Hey, how come the stuff from the 2.0 Dark World dungeon doesn't die in a black mist?" He's like, "Good point." And they went back and they changed it, and now it does. It's just one of those tiny, silly things that like you didn't have to do, but I like that you did.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think to some extent, like, in some ways, the community has to be the lore keepers
In a way,
because
yeah.
a company just can't
It's who
maintain it
will
for
be
so long.
louder than the nerds? Nobody.
Yeah, yeah, the weirdos on the internet
It's
sitting
great.
there filling out the wiki.
Yes.
One thing that I hear a lot about is, like, when I talk about, like, wanting to get back to Final Fantasy 14, the thing that I always hear about is main story quest burnout,
Yeah.
which is basically if you just follow the main story quest, you will go insane at some point because
Yes.
it is just following marker to marker to marker to marker to marker.
It is. Yeah.
What do you think is, like, the best way to avoid that burnout for a new player? Um,
Yeah. It's tough because it's not really meant to be just shotgunned all at once.
yeah,
And
and you can't do any of the normal end game content until you get through a lot of it. A lot of it is locked through there. So, like, if you wanna
yeah.
play with your friends, you need to get through 6, 7 expansions of story, right?
If uh Yeah, you can skip cutscenes, and then fortunately, you have the option of rewatching any cutscene from your room or from any in-room.
Yeah.
There's like a diary on a table, and you can select any cutscene in the game and rewatch it, which is nice. It helps me in capturing footage for any videos I wanna make about 14 because there's
Yeah, yeah,
all the cutscenes right there for you.
yeah. Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's a lot. The game's not really intended to be consumed that way. It sucks. It's like, yeah, imagine an author released a series of like 8 books
Yeah.
and you can't go to a super secret party until you read all 8 of the books. I'm like, "I don't want to, it's so much."
Well,
It's
you
a lot of
mentioned before that, like, a lot of Final Fantasy XI outside of just, like, pure combat is all these little things you do in the world. So, like, what are the things that you should be interacting with as you go through the story, right? Because even if you can't do the end game content,
Yeah.
there are these little things happening all around the world. Like, what type of things do you wanna should you keep an eye out for and engage with?
Oh, boy. I mean, I hate to say it, but, like, the MSQ is the gate behind which everything else is kept.
Mm,
You kinda have to do the MSQ. Um, Now there are skips for it. That's I think I mentioned this earlier. They sell skips on the Real Money Shop. Um, and that's, I mean, mostly for people who've already done it and just wanna make a new character. It's, it is a lot, and I was gonna get into this earlier when talking about, um I think you were talking about manga and the sort of serialization of it, which kinda makes it difficult to get invested. That's also a problem with the MSQ because, like I said, the point oh when a new expansion drops, the point oh content is great. I love that story. It's like I'm playing a regular Final Fantasy again. The content that they then drip feed you until the new expansion is, 2, 3, 4 times a year, you get another handful of scenes, and they all
mm,
just feel like a manga with an artificial problem at the end,
mm.
that is then resolved when the next one drops. Um, those can be kind of a slog to go through at
Have
times.
they talked about trimming those too? Because I know the original expansion, they trimmed content, but
Yes.
I don't or not expansion, sorry, the original relaunch of the game, they trimmed content, but do they talk about trimming any of those other ones or
No, they're better about designing those now. Those are deliberately designed to sort of, bridge the story points that need to be bridged by the time the new expansion drops. And
Mm,
sometimes it's done in a very clever way, like, um, the space between Stormblood and Shadowbringers specifically, I thought was fascinating because they introduced a new plot problem I had no idea what it was or where it came from or how it was even going to be resolved. Like things were happening months and months and months before the release that we would not understand until later. And that I thought that was really good writing. This introduce a mystery that we're not touching for a while, but is there in the background.
Mhm.
That's great. But yeah, consuming all of it at once is not recommended.
Yeah.
It's not
Maybe
great.
play an expansion at a time, take a break, and then just hope eventually you'll catch up, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
yeah, I would do that. Yeah. Because it's a shame because it's really good. It's good writing. They're good characters. They go places literally and figuratively, but it's just so much content at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like, because I feel like in other games, there's side content kind of all throughout, like outside of MMOs, like in some ways those games are about grinding a main story, but you can go and do side content around and things like that. Like, is that stuff there? Because like all I always hear Final Fantasy 14 is the best single player Final Fantasy of the last decade, right?
Yeah.
Even though there hasn't been that many. But I guess like in my mind, like is it just when people say that, are they just saying narrative, or is part of it also game design as well?
Oh boy. Might be. I mean, certainly narrative. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still an MMO. They have made it easier for people who want to play solo to temporarily match with people to do dungeons and bosses. Oh, no, wait, I just forgot. You can do a lot of that with NPCs now.
Yeah, yeah, they
Um,
changed it. I think like they pair story specific characters in as
yes,
well.
a few years ago they went back and they started adding NPC support to dungeons, and then with expansion for the past few expansions, yeah, you've been able to do that with story relevant NPCs. Which is
Mhm.
great. They've got their own like little flavor text when things happen in a fight or a dungeon. They'll say a cute thing that character would say. So yeah, in that sense, I think it is very one player friendly.
Do you think you lose something from doing it that way, or do you think it is that content isn't meaningful enough to need to run with other people? Or not need to run, but that there's not the benefit of playing with other players.
I think it works. It's a little bit slower. If you're doing it with real people, it's going to be faster.
Mhm.
Playing with the NPCs is I think across the board it takes more time because they all default to safe strats.
Yeah.
Um, Dungeons in particular, like it's common to pull groups of monsters wall to wall and then just kill them all in a big group. Whereas the NPCs want to stop and fight each group individually instead of combining them. But also, it's it's not a thing that comes into play in the end game. It's really only for people who just want to do story,
Mhm.
because those obviously you can't use NPCs to do end game content. That's people only. So like, but yeah, for what it is and what it does, I think it's a great option for people who prefer to play a single player Final Fantasy.
The narrative I've built around myself with Final Fantasy 14 is that like I have become very isolated playing that game.
Yeah,
I worry that part of that is me thinking too much about Final Fantasy 11.
yeah,
And so one thing that I've maybe been considering with that, like more narrative, like doing the characters and the fights, is you mentioned earlier the meta of Final Fantasy 11 or Final Fantasy 14. I am finding that I do not like the meta in most things in life. Any game I play, I don't like watching a video to figure out how something works, all that stuff. But in what you mentioned earlier about not wasting people's time, um, I think there's pressure to do what works because then you're not wasting 4, 6 people's time if it doesn't work just because you didn't do it the way that was the right way, right?
yeah.
And so, like, trying to push back on that's, like, a really hard thing sometimes, and I wonder sometimes if I played it with the NPCs, if I would be more willing to just go in and just appreciate it for what it is, rather than worrying about did the decisions I make getting to this, not researching this, mean that we're gonna end up in a situation where we're not gonna succeed? Obviously, that doesn't really matter so much for older content, but when I was playing actively, there I did feel like I was when I was doing Duty Finder and things like that, there was a pressure to perform or else somebody will get mad, may say something at you, and then leave and it says light party on
Oh
screen. And
no.
then you're just
Yeah.
like, oh. And I don't know if I overemphasize that stuff happening, but I remember feeling by the time I quit, I felt very negative about playing with other people because I felt like if I messed up, somebody there would call it out and then get really upset at you for not doing it right.
Yeah.
Um, So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Like, because
What? Yeah.
I'm wondering if I should play with other with NPCs,
No,
but I wonder if I was overthinking about it as well.
that's
So
totally valid. That's totally valid,
yeah.
and that's how I approached the game, early on. I was constantly worried that I was not doing my job correctly or not doing enough
Mhm.
damage, and that is just it is something you have to learn over time, and fortunately, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of YouTube videos about, "Oh, you wanna play this job? Here's how you do it. Here's the basics."
Yeah. Which is the
Which
thing, I don't like that though.
yeah,
That's
okay,
the
'cause
thing.
that's
I
part of
don't
the
like
meta?
going and seeing somebody else's thing. I like figuring it out for myself.
Yes.
Like when I play when I look at Final Fantasy XI, I'm not
Yeah.
looking at guides of how to play a class. I'm pulling up an armor list and saying, "What armor do I want?"
Oh, okay.
And it's good to know, like, generally how a job works, right? I wanna know that vitality is good on Paladin, right? I know that, but I shouldn't be, like, sitting there worrying about, well, how does damage number get, like, calculated with vitality? Because once you go above
Yeah.
60, the amount you get from it's lower, and, like, that's too much. That's like when you're, like, sitting there and analyzing, like, the why somebody behaves a way, and it just comes back to they wanna reproduce, and it's like, that's a very, like, inhuman way to look at it.
But
And it sounds like you're almost like tearing a game apart where it's like no longer thinking about the gameplay, it's all a numbers game. And
yeah,
so like that's one of my fears. And even when it comes to rotations of just like you need the optimal rotation. That's like the thing I don't like when I
yeah,
play games, I feel like. And that's
okay.
my fear, I think, in going to 14 because it sounds like doing an optimal thing is the goal here.
Yes, but it's okay. I would say and I did enjoy this about 11. 11 did some 11 was the thing that taught me what min-maxing was when I was younger,
Mm,
because I was approaching 11 the way I approached any other game before that, which was, well, this everyone should be well-rounded. This guy has a lot of strength, better give him the thing that gives him more magic. No, why? FF11's like, no, buddy, you have to min max if you want to hit anything. You need to load up with accuracy if you even want to land a
yeah,
punch.
yeah.
And it, you know, then I started looking. I would spend hours just looking over gear sets on
Mhm,
Alakazam.
mhm.
Like, oh, where do I get these? Oh, where do I get this? Where do I get this?
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, that was fulfilling something that FF14 has sort of integrated into its own systems, which is no, here's all the gear that you need to do your job. There is a little bit, yeah, there is a little bit more spending time outside of the game with the meta. I have a love-hate relationship with several FF14 discords where people have very passionate opinions. It's a lot of what's the right way, what's the best way, and it turns out at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of variation between these things, which takes some of the stress off of the player. But yeah, at the expense of there is a meta. You should learn a lot of the basic things before you jump in. I would say at the very least, just watch a video about how rotations work across the board. Just what's a good
Mhm.
way to optimize play to do what 14 wants you to do. And that's typically just always be pressing a button. Like
Yeah.
that's the number one rule is always be pressing a button. As soon as your thing comes back up, hit it again. If something glows after that, hit the glowing thing. That's it, really.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. Like, it's just like because I think I play Paladin,
Yeah.
and Paladin is press 1, 2, 3 over and over and over again as every time I played it. And then when I came back the other time, it was like press the button there, you spin a lot, and that gets everybody's attention when you spin a lot,
Oh yeah.
basically.
Dungeon speed.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that like I felt like I would just not know what to do with it. And I think I would worry so much about not using it at the wrong time, I just would never use it, which is its own problem, right?
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm never gonna use any of these skills other than just, the core paladin rotation, which was almost at the time very simple. I think it's
Yeah.
gotten a little bit more complicated where there's like different types of three hit combos you can do where
Yeah.
you can like lower attack damage versus pull like the enemy's attention. It's been so long and it feels like Final Fantasy 14 every time I check in, like the gameplay has of a job has changed so much that I'm like, I don't really know what any of these skills are anymore.
Yeah, that's true
So
because I leveled every job at one point. At one point,
yeah.
I was so desperate for something to play, I just leveled everything to max level.
Mhm.
And I'll now be playing with folks, and they're like, "Oh, we need a healer for this." And
Mhm.
I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll take a healer." And I go to choose a healer, and it's like, "Oh, the playstyles have changed just enough that like I kind of don't feel confident playing this anymore."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is not uncommon. But what you said about not performing properly and seeing that light party come up on screen is like that's a real stress that I've had in the past, especially as a tank when I was leveling tanks, because tank is one of those jobs where you do have to respond a lot more situationally to things, like knowing when to use tank buster cooldown or knowing when to provoke or shirk or do any of that kind of stuff. I think that's why I gravitate towards DPS, is because it's straightforward.
Yeah,
I think if I played healer or tank, the game might be just a little too stressful for me.
yeah.
Whereas with
Yeah.
DPS, it's just no, just hit, dodge. That's all you do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The community aspect of it. So I've heard like really mixed things about Final Fantasy XIV's community, and I think my general feeling with let me let you talk about the community first. So
Okay.
I don't know how engaged you are with the broader community. It sounds like you have Discord groups that you don't necessarily know. You're like, would you generally call the Final Fantasy 14 community good or bad, or like how you? What are your feelings on that?
I'll say generally good,
Yeah,
chaotic good. I think is the Final Fantasy XIV community.
yeah.
Um, and it's kind of undergone a couple of shifts. I think initially it was just it was a good group as the game started picking up steam. There was
Mhm.
a huge I think it was Shadowbringers. Shadowbringers is widely regarded as the best expansion, I think. I consider it to be the best one in 2019. And I believe that's when there was a large influx of players from WoW. Because at the time, it coincided with people losing interest in WoW and then people seeing, oh, this new FF14 expansion looks really good. Maybe this is a good time to jump on.
Yeah.
FF14 suddenly got a huge influx of people. Shadowbringers, the servers were having a tough time at the launch of the expansion. And then the pandemic happened and people just kept jumping on FF14 and it got really big. And by the time Endwalker came out, there was even more people started jumping on. It was the culmination of 10 years of lore. Art direction, storytelling, savage content, everything was getting better.
Mhm.
It was building on the things that Shadowbringers had done. And that community, I think, has fallen off a little bit in the past couple of years. A lot of people were disappointed with Dawn Trail for several reasons.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, the pacing was a little off. Some characters were underused. Some things could have been better. I think that's why people were, I guess, jumping ship. But the other half of that is just, that's also just the cycle of these expansions, is that the story's going to cool down for a while. Once you get the MSQ out of the way, if you're not doing the high end stuff, like, yeah, you're going to take a break for a while. Like I do that sometimes. It's fine. And I think where the community is now is at about a pretty even place.
Mm.
Um, there was a lot of, I've never played WoW. I have interacted with WoW players before, and I think that FF14 did get a nice, unhealthy injection of toxicity from the WoW exodus around the time. And I think some of those players have stuck around. A lot of them have left. So I think that the community now is, in general, pretty good. It's not bad. I regularly encounter very nice, very cool, very chill people. That's always been FF14's one of the big appealing factors to me over time. I mean, assholes are going to exist in any game online.
Yeah.
As long as a game is on the internet, there's going to be assholes there.
And it is one of the biggest online games out there, right? So the pool of people who are in there, it's massive. Like, because I've heard complaints that the community is horrendously toxic. I also have heard people complain about the community being so positive that you can't say anything bad about the game, and so they like
Oh
wrap around
boy.
to being toxically positive. Like,
Yeah,
you don't like
that's yeah.
Dawn Trail. Why are you even talking about this on the internet? And I've seen, I was on Twitter before, like looking at Twitter, I don't Blue Sky, one of those two. And like one of the people I follow who play Final Fantasy XI, they were talking about what they didn't like about current Final Fantasy 14. And one of their friends who was a 14 player, like posted like in their thread of like, why are you talking about this? If you don't like it, just don't talk about it.
That's not how
And it's
that
like,
works.
that's not, yeah, it's not how it works. And like, I think there is a balance there of
Yeah.
like, the problem I have, and I think we touched on this on the last podcast, like I generally want to like aim towards a positive conversation, but that doesn't mean the negative isn't there for a reason, right? I think my problem is when somebody comes in and says something negative and you ask, well, why do you think that is? And they say, because the developers are stupid idiots who don't know how to do
Yeah.
anything. And
It's
it's like, okay, that seems like you making a lot of assumptions about somebody you
yeah.
don't know, and you're not a game designer. So like that doesn't mean you can't be upset about something, but I think they just don't know how to express it, and
Yeah.
it comes out in this like very hateful way in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, I
It comes down
guess.
to, are you making these complaints in good faith, or are you just bitter about something that's popular that you don't like? Because those are very
Yeah, yeah.
different things. Because
And part of it is like being oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I have a lot of complaints about FF14. It's not a perfect game by any means, but I'll always go to bat for it. I'll try to be fair and defend it, even though there's a lot of elements of it that, like housing, for instance, that I think are just awful and should be overhauled. And I know it's not easy to do that. You have to be realistic about these things, but it's not perfect. No game is perfect. Have fun with what you got.
Yeah, yeah. I think one other thing too is like, and I noticed this on myself a lot where, you remember Balan Wonderworld when that came out and everybody
Yes.
hated Balan
Wow.
Wonderworld?
Yeah.
I like Balan Wonderworld. It's okay. I don't love it. I think it's a neat game. But I will sometimes see people like dunking on a game like that, and it suddenly has a spotlight on it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to look at the conversation around that and be like, man, I hate the gaming community. They're always so negative about all this. When it's like, this really, like, yes, these videos get like millions of views, but how many people are probably on the internet talking about Balan Wonderworld, like in a sense of just, actual negativity. And I do see that in person where I'll meet somebody and I'll be like, oh yeah, I thought Balan Wonderworld was all right. And they'll like be like, you like Balan Wonderworld kind of thing. But I think what I'm doing in that situation is I'm highlighting what this story is about this game. And I'm looking for people around that story that kind of reiterate the fact that I think there's a lot of negativity around this game. And so when I see positivity, it doesn't appear as much, or I don't notice it as much. So I think if you think like the community is toxically positive or toxically negative, you might focus more on the side you believe exists
Yeah.
because it's such a large number of people interacting with 14. Because you can always find examples of it, right? You can always find somebody to feed that narrative kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a video game, and at the end of the day, people like to have passionate opinions about video games.
as I mean, both me and you make YouTube videos,
Yes. Yeah.
so
Oh.
um, I know we're kind of coming up at like 2 hours here, so I don't want to take up too much of your more of your time. Um, But, as long as you're good, the
Hi.
one thing I did wanna dig into a little bit more was endgame. I know I've been trying to push this a little bit away from endgame because I think that's, like, a very specific time in that game's,
Yeah.
like, life. Um, but, uh, endgame is one of those things that I do hear I don't know if complaints is the right word, but I feel like a lot of the endgame of Final Fantasy XIV, I have a hard time putting my finger on exactly what's happening there. And I guess, like, maybe not so much from the content perspective, like coordinating with other things, but like the gear. We talked about gear earlier,
Yeah.
right? And what I hear usually in reference to games like this isn't exclusive to Final Fantasy 14 is the idea of modern life service games having the gear treadmill, which is basically you will earn a piece of gear and 3 months later that piece of gear will be completely useless and you need to get a new piece of gear. Um, that might be the most negative way to look at it. I don't really know how true or not true that is. Um, but one thing there's a guy who's on our podcast before, or my podcast before, called Section Skyline. He plays Fantasy Star Online, and Fantasy Star Online 2 and the original Fantasy Star Online have very different approaches to how gear works. Where Fantasy Star Online 1, it's almost about like functionality more than anything. You find a new piece of gear and it lets you create a new build that might have like the ability for you to like freeze enemies or stun enemies or like, do like depending on the character class you are, it might modify certain spells and things like that. So you get a new piece of gear that has a long-term tail to how it works. Um, and then Fantasy Star Online 2, there's just like almost none of that basically. So I guess sorry, I went like a very long-winded way to ask you, what are your general thoughts on that? What do you think like works about Final Fantasy 14's endgame when it comes to the gear
I
situation?
Yeah, the gear treadmill is definitely real.
Yeah.
That's why, well, for many years people have been calling glam the true end game of FF14.
Yeah,
It's
how
just,
nice your character looks,
yeah,
basically. I wanna
the,
dress my cat up, my cat boy up,
yeah,
kinda
the
thing.
FF14 is very generous with the appearance you can give your gear.
Mhm,
Anything you've had in the past, you can put in a glamour dresser and then just apply it so you look like you're wearing whatever.
yeah,
But yeah, in terms of gear and stats, yeah, you kind of do have to grind for the new. If you're not doing high end stuff, this is not even a concern.
Yeah.
because you get new gear over the course of MSQ anyway as quest rewards, so you really don't have to worry about getting new stuff.
Mhm.
Um, it a lot of the weapons do look unique, which is kind of nice. One of the things I like about it, like especially the rewards for the ultimate fights, are
Mhm.
very unique and very lavish, glowing kinds of things. So if you have one of those, or if you have one of those glammed, it does send a message that like, hey, I suffered for this. I worked really hard on this for months,
Yeah.
and I finally got the clear. Here's my weapon to prove it.
Do
Um,
they feel scarce enough for it to matter?
oh boy,
Because I
for
think if everybody has the same shield, then what did you like? Yes, you all suffered, but what does
oh
that
yeah.
really mean? I guess.
Yeah, I never thought
Like,
about that, but it's now that I think about it, it's not common to see a lot of the same ones. I see a
mm,
pretty good because there's so many of them, but they're all very, very hard to get. I see a good mix of people using and paladins can mix and match. So like I'll see a paladin with an ultimate coil of Bahamut sword and a Omega Protocol shield. Those are two different ultimates that they did. Um, it's but that's at that point though. It's no longer really about the gear treadmill. It's about the accomplishment itself, because in order to even do ultimate fights, you already have to have the best gear possible.
yeah. In
Um,
some ways, it's almost like a physical achievement. It sounds
yes,
like,
yeah,
mm. Or
um,
not physical, but visual achievement.
yeah. But
So unfortunately, Square Enix doesn't mail you a sword
oh, that'd be
after
great.
you're done.
Oh man,
Hey, what about NFTs? Digital, physical.
sure.
I feel like didn't they have like an NFT thing with like Final Fantasy XI at some point?
Oh no,
Was like the Shadow Lord or something. I don't
I
remember.
hope not.
I feel like they attached an NFT to something. Maybe it was a Final Fantasy VII thing. That seems a lot more appropriate,
Yeah,
probably. Like,
yeah, because
here's
the
your cloud NFT.
CEO of Square Enix was briefly like, "We're getting into NFTs, everybody," and
Hey, guess what? They're still doing
are
it.
they
Just
still?
nobody in the West covers it.
Oh
You
no.
know, this is kind of a side note. They have this weird game going on right now, and it's interesting because it's all about information bartering. And so you keep information to try to increase the value of that information
What the?
from other players. It's it's weird, but it is probably the most interesting NFT game I've ever seen. That does not mean you should play it or that it's good, but
Oh,
there's a Japanese reporter who was talking about it, and I read his article about it, and I thought it was like, well, that's at least it sounds like you're doing something with it,
all
because
right.
previous games they haven't really done anything. Anyways, I have this weird like little brain thing where like I have to know why Japan keeps talking about crypto and NFT because they continue like every game news site still covers it
Yeah,
in Japan.
it's one of those.
So
So it's one of those trends that like Japan saw happening in the West,
mhm.
and then realized they could make money off it. And then when the trend started dying down in the West, Japanese outlets conveniently stopped reporting that. And so a lot of the consensus in Japan is still, oh yeah, NFTs, of course.
I will say just for like uh, I don't know if like clarity is the right word or not. There is at least one company I know that is succeeding in that space.
Wow, okay.
They actually are a Final Fantasy mobile game developer. Whatever the Final Fantasy Tactics based one is, I forget what it's called. It's like War of the Lions or something like that. They apparently made a bunch of money through crypto stuff. But anyways,
Like,
most other companies I don't really see it. Anyways, but NFT gear aside, I think it's a fascinating topic. That's why I like continue to read it. But yeah, it also I have a lot of thoughts on gamified investment, but it's mostly a scam. So in my opinion, or maybe I shouldn't say it's a scam, but the incentive structure is very poor for users who use it. In my opinion, because I don't like defining something as like a scam per se, but there's
I think
anyway.
I think
I
it's
don't
widely
know
regarded
enough
that
to what's like a legal like understanding of like what is like fraudulent in that regard, right? I guess that's
yeah.
what I mean. But I would say it looks very suspect.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who like is very conservative on those statements. So the fact I'm saying that
Yeah.
is probably a good sign of that. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But anyways,
Uh,
yeah. So I guess like from a gear perspective, so it sounds like for the glamour side, I guess is that the only aspect of it, or do the stats feel like they play a role? Are they
um
meaningful?
stats, oh boy. Yeah, stats kind of play not nearly the role they did in 11. Because like in 11, you could be a level Did 11 go up to 100 or was it 99? It was 99, right?
Originally it was 75, then they went to 99, and now there's master
Oh, right.
levels, which are above 99.
It's like
And
you
there's
remember.
gear level as well, but yeah.
Well, yeah, that's FF14 works mostly on the item level or gear level.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like you remember in FF11, you'd be walking through Juno and you'd examine a ninja and he'd be wearing like a level 1 necklace or whatever because it gives him +5 dex or +5 agility. That's
And
not.
those stats
Yeah.
are something you feel. Like,
Yeah.
when you put that equipment on at 11, maybe more at lower levels, I will say. I feel like there's a weird bleed off on stats at higher levels.
Yeah.
But at lower levels, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
have +5 accuracy, you're staring at your character hitting all the time. You will eventually notice it and be
Yeah.
like, you know what? I have this piece of equipment on. I do hit
Oh, god, yeah.
one more time every minute.
Yeah.
So,
Like, that's not really a thing in 14. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you need to be wearing the highest item level things at all time, um,
Mhm.
to, because pretty much everything scales off of your item level and the stats attached to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they literally will not let you do content if your gear's not high enough level, right?
There's
I
a
think they
there's
lock
a
you out.
minimum item level to access, any content. I mean, it's usually very generous.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever been a problem for me, but, yeah, just to make sure that you're not wasting your time. Um, yeah, but I'll tell you this, like, one of the things I do miss from 11 was having to hunt down my artifact armor, 'cause I used to
Mm,
love that was very exciting to me because it meant that I was finally at a point in playing that job where I finally got to look like that job.
yeah.
Like I played samurai for, 40, 50 levels, still looking like a monk holding a knife. I didn't look like a samurai really. And then you finally you do like I remember the first time I started getting samurai gear, it was like I was like doodling notes in my biology notes of the pants in college.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I was about to finish the quest that night. I went to class and I started drawing pictures of Miyochi and Haidate in my notes like an idiot. Just so excited to finally look like a samurai through my pants.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
14 is just it's kind of out of the gate. No, you can always look like your thing, and in a way I like that. But in
Mhm.
another way, I do miss the anticipation. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Um, I wanted to make sure I have a list of things that I got, feedback from about how people feel negatively about 14, and I
yeah,
wanted to see if there's anything in here I wanted to just make sure I ran by you.
sure.
Talked about jobs already. Do you think that's like a legit complaint about jobs in terms of just all of them feeling very same, or do you think it's something
Um,
that
I don't think it's. I think it's just an aspect of the game that people. If you're going to play 14, it's something to accept that this is how the game
Mhm.
views jobs. They are more or less interchangeable by role.
Yeah,
It's really you're choosing a role more than you're choosing a job. You're choosing a role, then you're choosing a thing that looks cool to you.
yeah. And then from like a gameplay perspective, one of my friends said it feels like a game that's too afraid to offend people. And it kind of reminds me of the idea of like I don't know if you remember with the Helldivers guys, they said something, and I'm sure this comes from somewhere else, but a game that's for everyone is a game for no one. I'm not saying that necessarily is true because Helldivers 2 is incredibly successful. And also Final Fantasy 14, I don't know the current state of Final Fantasy 14, but obviously it's still one of the biggest MMOs right now. So even though it is kind of this more rounded thing, I
Yeah,
think it is appealing. I kind of compared it to them, and I don't know if they really agreed that it feels like it's a very Call of Duty-esque game where you kinda know what you're coming into, and
yeah,
the game isn't going to put anything outside the realm of that too much, right? I'm not gonna play Call of Duty and suddenly it has some crazy new mechanic that isn't optional at least, right? And I
yeah,
feel like Final Fantasy 14, it sounds like you're not gonna play the game and then, like, have your job be considered obsolete all of a sudden because some change or something like that, right?
yeah. I
'Cause even, like, playing Final Fantasy XI on the private server, thieves still have the problem of, like, I can't do enough damage and nobody wants me.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
unless somebody wants a drop, that's about it because they have increased drop rates, but yeah. Would you say that's probably pretty accurate or
I think that the idea that a game for everyone is a game for nobody is very silly and misunderstands video games.
Gotcha.
It sounds like the rhetoric that people were throwing around when there was a big debate about difficulty settings in games and FromSoft, and some
Mm,
people were saying, "Hey, how come Dark Souls doesn't have a normal or easy setting?" And everyone's like, "Because that's the point. You're supposed to suffer." And like, I don't think
yeah,
that's necessarily a good thing. I think including an easy setting in a FromSoft game isn't hurting anybody. It's not stopping you from playing the hard version of the game that you were intended to play. It's totally fine. And I
yeah,
think it's important. Again, it's astounding how often like capital G gamers forget this, but it is a business. You want people to buy your product. The more people who can play your product, the more people are going to buy your product. A game for everybody is a game for everybody.
yeah.
That equals money and sales. That's good for the company. Why not do that? There is hard content in 14. You have to work to get there. You have to work to clear it. It's not necessarily for everybody, but it's for everybody to get in. The cost of entry is low. It's easy to start. That's the point.
Gotcha. Um, and then one other thing, I had this idea. So, like, when I think about, I saw earlier about like Final Fantasy 11, there's a lot of ability to be flexible with the job, right?
Yes.
Where you can be like, oh, on my paladin, even though I don't have a way to sleep things on paladin normally, put them asleep. If you equip a great sword and spend hours leveling your great sword, you can get the shockwave move, which is not a guaranteed way to sleep enemies, but it can sleep enemies.
Yep.
And so you just spent hours and hours and hours grinding out this very specific thing you probably will never use. But now I can say on paladin, I can sleep things technically. Um, but I think what Final Fantasy 14 to me says is that that's neat and fun. Go play the job that does that.
Yeah.
Rather than try to like fit your job into some weird thing in there. And one complaint that they had was the idea that when it comes to end game, there seems to be timed lockouts on gear. So the game doesn't really let you be flexible because it's literally preventing you from building your class um, at a reasonable rate. Because like, you can only get like a piece of gear a week or something, I think they were
Oh,
saying.
that, yes. Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know if you feel like that is like a negative aspect of the game. To me, it just sounds like a please continue to stay subscribed to our game.
I think it's partially that. I think it's
Yeah.
partially also a safeguard because this is content that you need 8 people to clear. All 8 people need every drop or almost every drop from every fight.
Mm.
And there's nothing to stop you from just, grinding it out over hours and hours and hours and hours in a couple of days and completely burning out. I like the fact that I then have to wait a week. I then have to log out of the game, go for a walk, do something else that's not related to
Yeah.
stressing about the fight. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Hang on, wait, I had something else. What were we talking about just before this?
We were talking about the a game for everybody's game for no one, which I thought about. Maybe I should clarify that they didn't say that specifically. I brought up that idea
Oh,
generally, but they were saying it's a game too afraid to offend people. Is what they said. But
um,
I would say that kind of fits with your argument of this is a business at the end of the day,
what?
and
Yeah,
when you keep that stuff, or sorry, when you do changes that might hurt the business, that might not be a good idea.
I
And
guess
it depends on the game you're making, though. I think so.
yes. I think this fits into the difference, the fundamental difference between 11 and 14, and that is the amount of time required because these games don't exist in a vacuum. I encountered 11 when I had endless free time. I encountered 14. I keep doing it as an adult when I had limited free time.
Yeah.
And I now gravitate towards 14 because I have grown up and I don't have the time for 11. But I loved the things that you talk about, the idea of grinding your great swords so that you have a chance of maybe putting something to sleep. Like, I love that shit. That's great. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I did that with my samurai. I leveled up my bow skill all the way up to the top just so that I could pull monsters when leveling and not miss every time.
You also have arrows that lower enemy attack power.
There's also that.
There you go.
Yes. So yeah,
I want that on. I don't want a level samurai, but I want that. So
that's the kind of stuff that it makes a minuscule difference, and by grinding it out, you're giving yourself that tiny advantage. How long did it take me to grind that out? I don't know, a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months.
and it
It's
probably won't change anything.
yeah, in practice, does it make a difference? It doesn't matter. At least in 14, I'm having a shorter experience, but it's a more meaningful experience. And
Yeah.
even if there is a geared treadmill, guess what? It's still healthy to be on a treadmill.
True.
It's still good for you. It's called exercise.
I do sometimes I don't like talking about this that much, but I do sometimes wonder if I feel like after school in life, it can be hard to know what to do next,
Yeah.
and MMOs give you something to work towards.
Yes. Oh,
Because
yeah.
it's really hard to figure out what you do next in life, but
Yeah.
you can always work towards the next thing in your MMO.
I do like that about it.
I when I when I do a Final Fantasy XI video eventually, I think I need to that's something I need to explore because in some ways I kind of let myself get addicted to Final Fantasy XI,
Yep.
so I
Me
could
too.
like self-study myself to say why are you addicted to
Yeah.
this? So, and
Yeah.
thankfully, as a contractor who sometimes doesn't have a lot of work, it's not a problem sometimes.
Yeah.
But in my mental state definitely gets worse. But it's interesting to kind of watch, like almost watch myself from over the shoulder and be like, why are you here? What are you
Yeah.
doing? And why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Because I find when I play Final Fantasy 11, I usually am significantly less happier than if I did anything else.
Yeah, I
Um,
get the feeling when I every time I revisit FF11, I feel like I got in my car and I drove 8 hours to break into my old elementary school and walk around the halls and be like, "Well, I'm here, now what?" Like, this is why am I here again? Why am I back here? I had a great time when I was here, but I've moved on. I've literally graduated. I don't need to be here.
I am curious about I want to revisit Final Fantasy 14 this year. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I would like to do that.
Alright.
Depends on what I prioritize. Am I going to be willing? I started up a different live service game right now, so that kind of ended up taking that place for now.
Oh, boy.
Um, um, it's a Konami game actually.
Oh.
That seems to be getting kids into gambling. Who can say?
Uh-oh.
But, I think me and my friend joke about it. Although he maybe says a little more serious about it, but I'm like, I don't think it's like a gambling thing. But it looks like a pachinko machine, or not pachinko, a slot machine.
Wow.
But anyways, uh, I don't know how I want to position this question. Is like where I'm at right now. So I think there's two things I want to ask you,
Sure.
and so you can kind of figure out how you want to answer this. I think. Um, I would like to get back to this game, but I have not really enjoyed this game in the past. Also, there are other people that I think dislike the game for different reasons than I do. But I think they want to like Final Fantasy 14. What do you think is the best approach to either a new player or somebody re-engaging with the game to try to get the best chance to enjoy the game for what it is today?
Oh, boy. I would say definitely just find somebody who has a free company. Just join a group that already exists,
Mhm.
because it is important to have just an active knowledge base around you at all times, so that it feels much more organic to just type into chat, "Where am I supposed to go for this quest?" than to have to open up a browser and look it up online, which really is not all that common in 14 because unlike 11, NPCs are marked. Where you need to go is marked for the quest. That's very helpful. But there's a lot of similar to FF11. There are some amounts of unspoken knowledge that the game just hides from you that
It's
you
like you
have to
mentioned
get
earlier
from
with
other people.
rotations, right? You have
Yes.
to like go watch a video about rotations, but that could also be a conversation you have in your link show, right?
That's also like more. I think this was a reaction to fan feedback because there are now more in-game tutorials for how the battle system actually operates, what certain terms mean, what certain roles are
Mhm.
supposed to do. Those are now available to starting players. That's very useful. But it is just yeah, get friendly with rotations. It's if you think of it, I started to think of it as like just a very fast turn-based system. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Is you hit a button and then you wait 2 seconds, then you hit another button.
Which is funny because I feel like everybody describes Final Fantasy 14 as slow. And in my brain, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is not slow.
It's not slow.
So,
It's 11 is I wouldn't say 11 is slow. I'd say 11 is leisurely.
yeah.
I don't think either of them are really slow. I think it's all deliberate. These are deliberate design choices. 14 is a little more fast-paced, and once I got used to that, I was like, "Oh, I do find this kind of comfy, actually."
This last year, I've really begun, I think, just deconstructing a lot of narratives in my head of what like certain games are or what certain publishers are and things like that. Like, had the video of like, what is Nintendo to me, right? What is the Xeno series to me with the Soma Bringer video, right? In a lot of ways, the reason why I have decided to do this is it really starts to build expectations of what a game or what a developer should be doing, right? What builds expectations is, I think, a broad thing, right? Like, what is your understanding of a genre? What is your understanding of the Final Fantasy franchise, right? And in the case of Final Fantasy XIV, there's a very particular lineage that I followed, right? Being a Final Fantasy XI player, and then getting into Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, and then even beyond that, what Final Fantasy XIV to you can change from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or a year ago, right? Like, there's the whole thing with, like, the identity of what a black mage is in Final Fantasy XIV changed, between two patches. Expectations, I think, are really powerful in forming how you receive something, how you receive a game. Resident Evil 6 went from being one of the worst Resident Evil games to me because I had a traditional history in Resident Evil, and then when I sat down and played it with a friend who had a completely different notion of what Resident Evil was, because he played the action games only, really, it ended up becoming my favorite Resident Evil game when I really sat down and played it with somebody who just was able to kind of break free from what those expectations were. And I think really opened my eye to what Resident Evil 6 could be on its own without those expectations. And I think one thing that's interesting here that maybe I didn't really focus on, because I don't know if I really caught this when I was like listening to Alex talk, was that like in the end, early on, he did not like Final Fantasy XIV that much, and it sounds like he also ended up in a situation where he's basically like, I don't know about forced to play, but very much there were some people who really gave him incentives to engage with that game, right? I'm sure this isn't the only answer to this. I mean, there's other places where like I think I have broken free of my expectations separately, but engaging with a group of people or individual who can help you appreciate something for what it is versus what you expect it to be, I think is a very powerful tool in that regard, right? Like they can really rub off on you. And I'm not necessarily saying that's like what Alex is saying, what happened with him, but just, and try to reading the situation. I kind of wish I dived a little bit more with that with Alex to understand like what that transition process looked like for him. But, I think one of my fears in returning to Final Fantasy XIV, because I haven't done that yet, even as of recording this since, I think 2020 was the last time I tried, it is trying to find that appreciation on my own. Obviously, I've listened to Alex talk and it is helpful, but like exactly how I break down the barriers of what my expectations should be with Final Fantasy XIV is its own challenge. I think in some ways I would like to be in a situation where I could rely on other people to help me with that, but then also I have like a lot of social anxiety. So like me trying to engage with people on Final Fantasy XIV will probably be its own challenge. But so I think at this point it is kind of just like a Ben needs to do rather than talk to people anymore. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Alex is that the fact that he does still like the game today. I do think we have a lot of different values. I think the reason I focus so much on combat was because I value combat over story. The story comes afterwards for me, right? But I also know Alex is like really big into narrative and games and things like that as well. So I think in a lot of ways, I'd be curious to know like what games me and Alex actually align on. I don't think I've ever really approached that subject because I know he's a big Dragon Quest guy, but then I don't know if I like normal Dragon Quest games usually. So I think we both like Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI, pretty all right. It's been a long time since I played it, but I'll vote pretty all right video game. So anyways, thank you so much for coming on the show, Alex. If you want to hear more Alex, he is out there on the internet, ready for you to visit his channels. No more Whoppers. We've talked about plenty of times before. I feel like between him and also Ray coming on the show, both co-hosts for that show, and very, very kind of just like if you want to hear daily lives of some people who are into video games, that seems to be the place to go in my opinion. They also have a Patreon where you can get bonus episodes. He also has a personal YouTube channel and personal Patreon. I missed this. He put out his new video, Quest for Cozy, falling in and out of love with video games, which I think I don't have that much trouble with like staying in love with video games, but I feel like a lot of people I know do. So I gotta do my homework and listen to this after I finish recording this. But he also has a Patreon where you can go check out his videos early, or also he has like a series called like XN10, which is like a little mini series of podcasts. It looks like he's playing Dragon Quest X right now in that podcast series, and I'm jealous. I wish I made time for Dragon Quest X. It seems like a really cool game, and in a lot of ways, I think probably would be more appealing to me than Final Fantasy XIV, maybe, but at least be a fresh start. I have no expectations of Dragon Quest X other than hopefully cool. And then also, if you want to check him out for social stuff, I think he's primarily on Blue Sky now as well. So all those links will be in the description and things like that. Also, I know nobody in here probably is in this target, but if you like the sound of Alex's voice, he also does voiceovers and stuff too. So if you're looking for a professional voiceover, someone who can give you real voices from real people, Alex can do that for you too if you want to go check out his website. So again, all those links in the description, so go check them out.